Greetings and welcome to this week's summary lecture. Today we're going to be talking about picking a very specific behavioral objective. I know what you're saying, Dr. Cohen, I already did that, and maybe you did, but technically you haven't done it formally, so we're going to formalize the process now. Before we did, of course, narrow down your topic, and hopefully if you've gone back and forth between one topic and another, things are starting to become a lot more clear now, especially if you have a target audience or two, right? So now that you have an audience to target with your specific message, with the overall objective of doing something, now you're ready to make a much more concrete behavioral recommendation in order to accomplish your overall goal, which is, again, what we established the other week. I'm so sorry. I feel so rambly in these messages. I just really have to work on it. I just lose it. I should use this board behind me or something because it helps me keep focus, but thank you for bearing with me. I appreciate it. Okay, so what do you need to do? Well, again, you start with your topic, and essentially what we're trying to do now is pick one very specific behavior. And honestly, we're going to talk about a couple of different objectives in addition to behavioral objectives that you could have, but a bare minimum for your campaign, what I need you to have is a specific behavioral objective. In other words, what is it that you want your audience to do? Now, for some of you, you're thinking, well, what else would I want them to do? And that's a fair question. It probably means that you've already been thinking about it, and maybe you're sort of a little bit ahead in this step. But let me show you how one particular issue could have lots of different behaviors associated with it. So maybe, for instance, one of you is working with a campaign to, I don't know, decrease obesity. Popular topic, right? Well, here's the thing. There are so many different behaviors that contribute to obesity. It could have to do with eating. It could have to do with eating something very specific, like sugar, right? So maybe a behavioral objective is to reduce people's sugar intake by a certain number of grams or something. But maybe instead of focusing on diet, you're more interested in behavioral objectives such as exercise, to get people walking 30 minutes a day, at least, 4 times a week or something like that. So here's the point. What you're going to be trying to do at this stage of the game is think about all the potential ways that you could address your wicked problem with specific behavioral recommendations. And then, just like we picked an ideal audience last week, you're going to be picking the most ideal behavioral objective for your audience. And that, again, is why we chose the audience first, because different types of behaviors might be better suited to different audiences, or some audiences might be more receptive to trying some behaviors over another. The important thing that you need to know about, how do we actually state these behavioral objectives? Your book has a nice little acronym for it. Behavioral objectives should be SMART. They should be specific. In other words, not just you want to reduce obesity, but you actually now want to increase exercise by a certain amount, okay? And again, that amount is up to you, but that leads into the second part, which is it needs to be measurable. Think about how sales goals, like if you were doing a sales campaign, if you were doing a marketing for-profit campaign, you would not just have specific goals about how much you want to increase your sales, but obviously they would be measurable. With sales, it's easy. You're usually looking at money or how many items are sold, right? So this is the same thing, except that you're going to be looking to quantify somehow the behaviors that you're looking at. Attainable too. Obviously it would be great to have a very specific objective of eliminating smoking, right? We just want to eliminate smoking, but probably not very realistic. Nobody expects to completely solve a problem with one campaign. In fact, campaigns usually have, when we're talking about behavioral objectives, they only have about good campaigns, a 10% success rate, which is actually really great because if your campaign's big, right, that means it reached a lot of people. But we don't expect usually dramatic changes with one campaign, so make sure whatever you're expecting is somewhat reasonable. Of course, it needs to be relevant. You need to be picking behaviors that are directly feed into what you're looking at. So, this could have to do possibly with social norms if we go back to the smoking thing. Maybe, we talked about, okay, I have a couple times in these lectures talked about e-cigarettes and how this is sort of like the new form of smoking, and obviously it has different risks associated with it or whatever. But now that you know who your audience is, you want to be thinking about issues that are specifically relevant to them. And now maybe, and I really have not done the research on this, obviously, but now maybe tobacco is not the big problem, but it's e-cigarettes or something like that. And it should be time sensitive, because this is a campaign, and you don't have forever either. If you were actually going to conduct this campaign, right, you would have a budget for a certain amount of time. You would also be really concerned with with monitoring your campaign, and therefore you need time constraints on it. So maybe your campaign will be over 3 months and you expect a specific behavioral outcome during that time, but you would want to be thinking about that right now. So just like what we did last week with the audience, we now have a little, I want to say worksheet. It is a worksheet, but a matrix to help you decide on what your behavioral objective should be. And you're going to sort of go through the same exact process where you first need to brainstorm all the potential behaviors that might be worth addressing. And then you're going to rate them along certain criteria. And again, you can weight it if you think that one criteria is particularly important or not. Otherwise, you can treat them all as equal and, on a 1 to 5 scale, rate them in terms of how much of something they have or how little. So for instance, impact. You're going to want to give points for how much this particular behavior would help solve the wicked problem that you're interested in to begin with. So if we're talking about obesity again, you would want to say, okay, well, okay, yeah, I could have people eat more vegetables and that would cut down obesity. But if I could make them cut sugar out of their diet, that would have an even bigger impact. So that would be ranked a little bit higher. Willingness. This is where the audience comes back into it, because this is a sort of the type of thing that you were assessing last week, and it might have even given you a preview for this exercise. But different behaviors are going to sit more or less well with your target audiences. And obviously you're going to want to pick a behavior that you think your audience would be receptive to trying out and hopefully maintaining, so you can rank it on how willing you think your audience would be to actually do what you're recommending. Again, some of these cold turkey approaches, when you're asking people to give up a particular behavior, might be a little bit of a hard sell. But if you have other behaviors you're considering, like, well, you don't have to eliminate sugar completely out of your diet, but maybe cut back or add in an artificial sweetener. I know some of you are like freaking out right now. It's like, no, my campaign's against artificial sweeteners. Well, I'm not endorsing it, just trying to pick examples here. So the next one is measurability. And I'm guessing if you have a pretty specific campaign goal already, if you already have a bunch of behaviors, they should all have some sort of quantifiable element to them. But basically, you just need to think about how easy is it going to be for you to tell how well something worked? Are you going to be able to observe this or ask people in surveys what they're doing? If you're actually trying to manipulate sort of like a public behavior, I remember somebody in class had once mentioned that they were interested in, and forgive me for not remembering, but interested in shifting how children made their lunch selections in the lunchroom. So that might be something that you could actually observe, right? You don't have to ask them how they're eating, because you're able to see, oh, look, they're taking more white milk and less chocolate milk, or things like that. But again, you would want to rank these, the more measurable the behavior you have, the better. Also, market opportunity, which is kind of like, you don't want to run a campaign to try to get people to do something that everybody's already doing, okay? So if there are certain behaviors that maybe have already caught on, as far as exercise or something like that, maybe you want to go to the behaviors that you score higher on. No, there's a lot of opportunity to tap into this. Not many people are doing it yet, which could, I admit, be an indication that maybe there's some sort of barrier to the behavior, but really it's also presents an opportunity. So that's really what you're looking for. Is there some sort of opportunity to get in the market and try to persuade people to adopt this behavior? Or if you're doing some sort of campaign to have people reject a behavior in that way. Hold on one second before I get to this. I need my beverage. You know how I get parched with all my yapping. Okay, and finally, market supply. So this is where you might need to do a little bit of legwork to see what kind of campaigns are already out there. You don't want to duplicate efforts that are already going on. What's the point? Not only is it not great because, oh, they might already have the behavior that you want to address covered, but depending on how the campaign's working or who they're targeting and where it's happening, another problem with this is it could confound your ability to measure your own campaign success, because you've sort of got these not that they're competing, even if they have the same objective, you're not going to be able to separate which message worked and which campaign worked from which one didn't, okay? So go ahead and start giving that a little try. As usual, your book does a great job of giving you all different types of examples of different types of specific behavioral objectives. I like the one here I found on page 159. Talks about the campaign purpose is to reduce traffic injuries. Fine. The focus is on texting and driving. So these are all things we came up with earlier, or if you were doing texting and driving. But then when they narrowed it down to a specific behavioral objective, they focused on to wait until you arrive at your destination to text. So that's one thing that you can encourage people to do. Somebody else might say, might recommend, oh, use a Bluetooth device. I mean, not that you can text with that. Or maybe get one of those contraptions that disables your text messaging, capabilities while you're driving or something like that. Again, the point is that there can be lots of different solutions or behaviors that help you address the problem you're trying to address. But what we're trying to do right now, and hopefully the matrix in your activity for this week will help with it, is you to narrow down what behavior makes the most sense for you to focus on based on your audience and, again, what other campaigns that are currently going on. The only other thing I want to add, and I saved this for last because obviously I don't want to emphasize it too much, is some optional objectives that you might want to possibly even need to have. So again, bare minimum, I need you to come up with a very specific, concrete behavioral objective. I need you to come up with a couple and then narrow it down to one. But some of you might realize that based on your audience, there might be some steps that you need to have come before you determine a behavioral objective. I'm sorry, not before you determine it, but before you ask your audience to make this leap in behavior or change in behavior, there might be some prerequisite knowledge or beliefs that they need to have. So your book, for instance, in the text messaging example says that this campaign also had a knowledge objective, the objective of conveying some sort of information to the audience, to know the percentage of traffic accidents involving someone texting while driving. Okay, so the reason why this campaign might think that's important is because they're saying, well, okay, we could tell people, we could rush to this behavioral objective and try to persuade them to put their phone down and not pick it up until they've come to their destination. But here's the thing, if people don't understand that it's dangerous to text and drive, then we need to make sure that they understand that. So in addition to giving them this behavioral objective, we also have this knowledge objective of helping them understand the risks associated with texting and driving. And do you see why I'm considering that kind of a prerequisite? Because without knowledge, the behavior might not make any sense to your audience, right? You have to first explain to them what the problem is in a way, and then tell them what sort of action they can use to solve it. Likewise, sometimes you'll need a belief objective, because even if you know texting is driving is, even if you know that texting and driving is bad, you might not think it's, you might not believe it's relevant to you. Like, oh, I'm a good driver or something. So maybe your other belief objective would be something like believing that texting and driving is a personal threat or something. I remember, I think I've mentioned before, I've done a lot of research on organ donation. And organ donation is an interesting behavior because people tend to have pretty positive attitudes towards organ donation. If you give people a survey and you say, is organ donation a good thing? They'll be like, yeah, organ donation's a great thing. Then if you ask them if they themselves want to be an organ donor, there'll be a disconnect. People who, and I'm not saying everybody, but an interesting phenomenon is that many people that score very highly is saying, I have very positive attitudes about organ donation. They don't score very highly on their willingness to become organ donors themselves. And the reason for this supposed contradiction, it's not really a contradiction, is because think about it. If you were in need of organs, right, you'd have very positive views towards organ donation. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you yourself want to commit to to being an organ donor, right? Because there might be certain risks behind it. And that's where the beliefs come in. Some demographic groups, for instance, different religious groups, some ethnic groups, they tend to think, for instance, that the body should be whole after death, and therefore they have belief systems that are opposed to organ donation. But if you had a campaign and you could explain that a religious leader has condoned it, I'm just making kind of a silly example like usual, but then that would be a belief objective. The belief objective would be having people come to believe that organ donation does not damn people's souls to hell or does not disrupt any sort of spiritual processes after death. And then you can sort of have the behavioral objective of asking them to become donors. So I hope this makes sense, and I didn't mean to go too much into that. For some of you, I think it actually might be really important, and it actually might help you work up to your behavioral objectives. But again, I'm not requiring it for your campaign proposal. I just want you to know that there are options to have in there. If you do have belief or knowledge objectives in your campaign proposal, obviously I'll expect those to be addressed when you start planning your messages and other types of marketing strategies, because that will be one of the specific objectives that you'll need to somehow address and hopefully, successfully persuade your audience of, either by giving them knowledge or by helping to change their beliefs and then asking them to do whatever behavior you're recommending, which is consistent with those. Besides that, I think we covered it all. So again, as usual, your worksheet should help walk you through these steps, and your book has great examples to check out, but if you need to get in touch with me and schmooze about it, just give me a little bit of notice before the assignment's due, and I'll try to help out. So thank you very much. Have a great